2, 1, go.
Good evening, everyone. What you are seeing in this screen is a few activities of Naimbe Doctor Foundation, which we have done since last so many years together. I am Dr. Arun Kure, President of Naimbe Doctor Foundation. Welcomes you all for the 125th CME by Naimbe Doctor Foundation. Today is a historical and proud moment for all of the medicos of Naimbe and Naimbe Doctor Foundation for two reasons. Firstly, with your active support and encouragement, we have successfully conducted 124th CME at a regular interval, and today we will be celebrating 125th CME. Secondly, today we have with us an eminent and well-known personality, Mr. Achyut Godbole sir, who will take us today to technology of the future world. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you for the today's CME. I request Dr. Vandana Kuchik, Vice President of Naimbe Doctor Foundation, to introduce Mr. Achyut Godbole sir.
Good evening, dear friends. A warm welcome to all of you. I feel truly honored as I have the opportunity to introduce the chief guest for today, who is a renowned author, columnist, and orator. Also, he is currently the managing director of Soft Excel Consultancy. However, he has a plethora of achievements to look back, as at his lustrous career, spanning for over 50 years now, started way back when he was in school. He has an inspiring record of scoring 100% in almost all the mathematics examination right from primary school to his graduation. His chemical engineer graduated from IIT Mumbai in the year 1972. With a massive experience of 32 years in developing software and managing software companies, he has traveled across the globe over 150 times to work for the purpose. He has had a lion's share while working at the top level management in the growth of notable companies like L&T Infotech, Patni, Syntel, to name a few. He has written 4 technical books on operating systems, data communication and networks, web technologies, and demystifying computers. These books are frequently cited as great reference books and have been translated in multiple languages, including Chinese. He has written 33 popular best-selling books in Marathi on topics ranging from computers, mathematics, management, literature, economics, right up to psychology, slavery, cinema, and music. Titles like Sanganak Yug, Gulam, Zapurza, Manakallod, Samavad, Anartha, and Musafir. He is columnist and has written popular columns like Tantra Mantra, Udyache Jog, Prani Jagat, and Vidyan. He has given numerous talks and speeches on radio, television, and many conferences worldwide. He has received many awards and has also contributed in building Ashiana, a school for mentally challenged children in Mumbai with about 40 autistic children. Dear friends, kindly allow me to welcome Mr. Achyut Godbole, a distinguished personality who has holistic approach towards life. Thank you. Before we begin, I request our mentor, Dr. S.V. Kulkarni sir, to say few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. Thank you, Achyut, for being here as one of the greatest attraction of our 125th CME. We really appreciate your journey, the journey in various aspects of life. It is really thrilling. It is really thrilling, fascinating, and enchanting for all of us. Not only you have got a deep interest, you have studied all the aspects of life, art, literature, culture very thoroughly and depicted in such a simple way that a common man also will understand easily. You wrote all this in a very lucid, friendly language. I recall few people in Louvre Museum of Paris walking out with your books on canvas and Zapurza. So it is really very big asset for an average person. I request you to please enlighten about your journey through this literature in brief, as well as for your future endeavors. Mr. Achyut Godbole, please. The star of evening.
Well, good evening. I must thank the Navi Mumbai Doctors Foundation for having giving me this opportunity to address all of you. And since you've asked me about my journey as an author, I must say that as the biodata actually reveal, there's not much that I can add. But just to say that I have been in, basically my life has been a love story of various aspects of life, whether it is music or literature or painting, or whether it is economics or psychology or cosmology or mathematics or engineering and technology and so on and so forth. So I think, or psychology, anthropology, philosophy, whatever. I mean, all these interests were, actually, when I was in the IIT, I got interested in all these subjects, not basically because of achieving or getting any marks, because I never worked or studied for getting any marks. And there my interests in all these subjects were kindled, and then I continued reading about them, and then my life mission was to understand and study these subjects, be student of all these subjects, and then explain all these subjects to a lay person in Marathi as much as possible. I mean, I chose Marathi as a basic language in which I could express. So I could have easily written in English, but I think there are several books in English which are available for an English reader. But in Marathi, there are not very many, and therefore I decided to write in Marathi. I've written around 30 books in Marathi, and as was mentioned, Boardroom was on management, and then Kimayagar was on science, and all these books are pretty big. I mean, Kimayagar is 600 pages, which talks about relativity, cosmology, quantum physics, and geology and chemistry and biology, and ends up last chapter is actually ape to man. So from the origin of the universe to the origin of mankind, I mean, that's the whole journey in 620 pages. And then there's Arthat, which is on economics, and then Manat on psychology, and Ganiti on mathematics, and Zapurza, 3 volumes on English literature, Canvas on painting and sculpture, and Limelight on Western cinema, and nanotechnology, Nadaved on Indian music with my sister Sulbha Pishvikar, who's actually a well-known singer. And then I wrote several books actually. I mean, Bakhar Sanganakachi on history of computers, and then Samvad on history of communications, and Anartha on essentially consumerism and climate change. So there are 30 odd books. The Genius series I wrote on about scientists, and then Symphony was on Western music, etc. So I think having done all that, and they all are very popular books. I mean, they've sold in 40,000, 50,000, 60, 70,000 copies, which is reasonably maybe a decent number, I guess, in Marathi. And but more than that, I get a huge amount of not just fan mails, but I mean, people call me and say that my books have actually changed their lives, and many people said that they were depressed, and then my books helped them come out of depression. And actually 13 or 14 people on record have said to me that they were to commit suicides, but because of my books, they actually decided not to, and then chose to follow different paths. I think that gives me an enormous amount of pleasure, having reached, being able to touch hearts of millions of people. I think that's the kind of achievement that I think I really cherish. My projects, future projects, I'll speak for a minute or two and then come to the main topic. Since you asked me this question, three books are in pipeline, which will be published in actually this Sahitya Sammelan, I guess in a month or two. And those are Sharir, which is actually your topic, which is about anatomy and physiology of human body, and which is a fairly large book, which is 575 pages actually, which I've written with Amruta. And then I have also written Sukshma Jantu, which I have written with Vaidehi Limaye. I mean, both of them are accomplished. Vaidehi Limaye is actually my doctorate in biochemistry. And I've already written Rakta and vitamins with Vaidehi Limaye, and they have become very popular. I have another book is My Lord, which is about history of law, and that will come out. And then there is another one which is Sukshma Jantu, Sharir, and there's another Grantha, which is the books that change the world, the 50 books that change the world, including Bhagavad Gita to Richard Dawkins's Selfish Gene, all that kind of stuff. So I think 50 books, Charles Darwin's books, Newton's, Einstein's, and Freud's, and so on and so forth. So I think these are the 4 books which will come out in a month or two, and then there are 8 more books which are likely to follow. Which I'll just sort of take names: artificial intelligence, in infotech, then industry 4.0, then Prakash, Pravas, autism, and so on and so forth. So I think these are the books that will come out in a year's time. Now, the reason why I think the current topic really is the technological disruption that is likely to happen in tomorrow's world. And I think the reason why I chose to speak about this is that I think there's an urgency about this topic, and you'll realize what I mean by urgency, because the disruption that's going to take place in our lives, and may not be in my life. I'm already 70, and I think but in the future generations, all of you, to your children, should definitely request them to think about what is in store for all of us, all of them actually. And even many of the young doctors that must be listening to this topic, you must think about what's likely to happen in the world, tomorrow's world. And I think that's the reason I've chosen this topic. Just to summarize, that the change that is happening today is extremely rapid, and I really can't even think how rapid the change is going to be in just years to come, even in a decade or two. I guess it's going to be disruptive, and I'll come to that. Just to give you some background about this, the universe was created 14 billion years ago. The Earth was created 4.5 billion years ago. The first living being came into existence 3.75 billion years ago. Human history spans around 100,000 years, and Alvin Toffler divides that into three divisions: agriculture, industry, and services. Agriculture spanned for tens of thousands of years, but there was hardly any change because there was no technology. People lived the same way yesterday, today, tomorrow, last week, next week, last month, next month, year, decades, and so on. But there was no change. Then followed industrial revolution. And only in a few centuries of industrial revolution, the kind of change that took place was much more than the change that took place in tens of thousands of years of agriculture. And then followed services, which the modern services started from 1960 onwards. And then the progress that we made in the few decades after 1960 was much more than the progress that we made in the few centuries of industrial revolution, which in turn was much more than the progress that we made in tens of thousands of years of agriculture. So I think those who've done mathematics will realize it's the d2y by dx2. It's the rate of change is extremely high. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that, how did this take place? I'll just talk about the services, the last section, that is 1960 onwards. 1960s was a decade of mainframes. 1970s was mini computers. 80s was PC personal computers. 90s was internet. 2000 onwards was mobile computing and technological convergence. And 2011 onwards, and I'm going to talk about this. 2011 onwards, for the next 30-40 years, what's going to happen is Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is a concept which actually originated in Germany, and now it has caught on. And Industry 4.0 actually encompasses various things. But why is it called Industry 4.0? The first industrial revolution took place when the steam engine came into existence with the railways and so on, with 1750 onwards. The second industrial revolution was with mass production, when Henry Ford introduced mass production using electricity, and that was 1920 onwards. The third industrial revolution is when computing and automation started in 1950 onwards. And fourth industrial revolution is 2011 onwards, because that's the date that Germany actually announced. It's still on. I mean, it's likely to continue for next 30, 40 years. And I'll talk about what's likely to happen during that time. Now, Industry 4, I'll also explain the technologies that really underlie, that the Industry 4.0 encompasses. The first, in fact, I'll just run that down and then explain each of them. Cloud computing, IoT and IIoT, then big data, AR and VR, and then 3D printing and artificial intelligence. And I'll dwell on artificial intelligence in detail, but let me explain the terminology and the technology that but I'm sure you must have discussed this in the earlier some sessions, but it might be useful, helpful to refresh some of these. Cloud computing came into existence because people did not want to own a lot of hardware themselves. And therefore, there were several companies who put batteries of large computing power and essentially rented out. I mean, so instead of having to buy a large amount of hardware and rent out space to house that hardware and having to maintain it, the hardware as well as the staff who will maintain that hardware, instead of having to do that, I put all my files and databases on a cloud. So there are companies who maintain such large data space, which can be hired essentially, and that is what is meant by cloud. And that came to existence because there was a need for the same. Then this 5G technology, and 5G, as we know, Huawei in China has already announced last year, and there's already a lot of politics going on about it. And then if time permits, I'll also touch upon what 5G is all about. But then because 5G has an enormous amount of bandwidth, you must remember that the entire concept of 5G is really enormous amount of bandwidth, because the data rate is 5 gigabits per second, for instance. Now, this is essentially necessary because today there are millions of sensors, millions of social networking data, and a huge amount of AR and VR, virtual reality and augmented reality data and videos and so on and so forth. All that needs huge amount of bandwidth, and therefore there's a need for 5G. And I think in a few years' time, you'll certainly have 5G. Reliance already announced 5G, etc. So 5 gigabits per second can handle 1,000 times more traffic than 4G, which is 10 times faster than 4G. And you can download an HD cinema in less than 1 second. That's the kind of speed that we're talking about. A cinema downloaded in less than 1 second. There are 5 technologies which are 5G uses, but I won't go into that because there's not time. Millimeter waves because of very high frequency bandwidth and small cells, and massive MIMO and beam farming and full duplex. But I won't go into that because that will take time. But I've explained that somewhere else in my book Infotech. Actually, I have a full chapter on 5G. So cloud computing, 5G, then IoT and IIoT. What is IoT? IoT is essentially Internet of Things, it talks about smart homes. So basically in a home, all appliances have sensors, and all these are connected to internet, which is why IoT, Internet of Things. Which essentially there was an advertisement that Amitabh Bachchan actually puts his AC on remotely and so on. When he's somewhere else in his office, he can put the AC in his house on or off from there, because he can give an instruction which actually travels through internet to the sensors, and then the AC is put on or off. So basically I mean, that's quite fancy, but it's much more than that. Smart homes is a concept which will take roots in West first. In India, it's unlikely to sort of take root in a few years, but maybe after a lot of time gap, 20, 30 years, certainly it'll happen. IIoT is Industrial Internet of Things, which essentially means all factories are automated, all factories have sensors, all machines have sensors, all cars have sensors, and they all are transmitting information, in every second. For instance, the car, there are hundreds of parts, as we know, or hundreds of assemblies, sub-assemblies, and so on. So each one is sending a message as to when is the next maintenance, or something is not working. For instance, a tire is not working, or some engine is not working, or something else is not working, or so that sends a message. So the itself that you need to change me, basically. Or in factories, the machines send a message about the efficiency with which it itself is working, or what kind of maintenance it is there is, the machine needs, and so on. So I think the IIoT means all the machines and factories, and if there is a company which has 5 factories, all those factories also connected. They also send messages of output, and also there's a software sitting on that as to how to manage, then how to distribute and all that. And there are obviously operations, research, algorithms which decide after that what should be produced, where, when, etc. Now that is IoT and IIoT. So that we're talking about smart homes and smart factories. Then there is big data. What is big data? Big data is not, on the face of it, in terms of dictionary meaning, you can say large amount of data. In fact, in around 2000, we used to discover very large databases, VLDBs they used to be called, and they used to be treated a little differently than small databases with SQLs and so on. But the big data has a huge amount of data. I mean, but it is said that the data that is generated because of social media, hundreds and millions of messages that are sent today, for instance. We'll come to the use of that data, the way Amazon uses and then Facebook uses, etc. But the data in social media, in 4 types of media, multimedia means 4 types of media: text, that is A to Z, 0 to 9, etc. Then audio, then video, and still photograph. These are the 4 formats in which humans have communicated all along. And these 4 formats are called as multimedia. So all the multimedia, when it can be digitized, and they can be digitized, as you know, a digital photograph means it can be converted into zeros and ones. A DVD stores moving pictures in zeros and ones. Characters, when you depress a key in your keyboard, A to Z, etc., is converted into zeros and ones. Similarly, audio. So all these 4 formats can be converted into zeros and ones, and therefore can be stored on your computer and can be transmitted through internet. Now that data is increasing at enormous amount of rate. But that is not just it. The big data doesn't only mean the volume of data. It also means the relationship between the data items. So today, the entire artificial intelligence is actually focusing on finding out patterns within data. That is the most important thing. So in fact, you must have heard data is the next oil. The reason is tomorrow's world will run on data. And I'll probably sort of talk about that a little bit. But essentially, how do you find the relationship? The difference between the classical database management system, DBMS or SQL, what we used to call, is that in SQL, you knew what you are seeking. You knew what you wanted. For instance, I could ask a question: give me a list of all the students in my class whose height is more than 5 feet 5 inches. Or give me a list of all the students in my class who scored more than 60 marks or whatever. So it used to go through the list of students with their marks and so on, and pick up all the students whose marks were more than 60 and give me a list of those. That is the standard query. I know what I want. In big data, you use what is called a technique which is called data mining. Now, data mining, you don't ask a question, give me a list, etc. Data mining, you feed the data and ask the algorithm to find out the relationship or patterns within data. That is very important. I'll give an example. In a bank, for instance, there's a large data of all the customers, and you give that to data mining, for instance, and then data mining comes back with, it uses various statistical methods, coefficient of correlation, and hundreds of other things, and it finds out that if out of my customers, the algorithm says that if there is somebody who has MBA degree and has 3 years of experience, then he or she is likely to buy a car. Now that relationship of who owns a car, when did he or she buy it, is he or she MBA or whatever. I mean, there are hundreds of degrees, hundreds of transactions, hundreds of purchasing capabilities and behaviors. So it matches and finds out this relationship. There's a 70% chance that if there's an MBA with 3 years experience is likely to buy a car. If that happens, then the bank really goes through all the list of the customers, finds out who are MBAs with more than 3 years experience, and that information it may have gathered through know your customer and all that kind of stuff, and then gives the mobile numbers of those people to the call centers to keep on calling them. Do you want car loan? Do you want car loan? Do you want car loan? This is the whole idea. Now, big data essentially therefore uses algorithms such as data mining and so on to come to conclusions which will help and help its marketing strategy. So big, but essentially the whole point is in the last 5 to 10 years, the volume of data started increasing enormously, and therefore the whole question of big data. That augmented reality and virtual reality, and I'm sure you know this, but I will not spend too much time on this. Augmented reality is imposition of in the actual real situation. You impose some augmented reality, some reality which is not real, unreal reality. I'll give you an example. And an example where it is used can explain where augmented reality can be used. For instance, I think one paint company, almost all paint companies use this today. So they, you can actually send details about your house, and then select for this room. I want to have, let me decide for this wall. Let me choose pink color. It actually shows you how your house, that room will look like if that wall is painted with pink color. But then you have a look at it and say, no, I don't think that really is very good. Show me purple color. So it actually changes and shows you your own house, sitting in your own house. You can watch how your house will look with different colors. Test and then select a color and then actually use it to paint your. Same thing about furniture. A furniture company can let you know how a particular furniture will fit into your what room and what size of sofa and this, that, and you can move, turn around, select different sizes and so on until you're satisfied about the colors and sizes, and then place an order. So this is just basically, I'm just giving an example of how augmented reality it can be used. And the same thing is the cosmetic industry is like full of all the hair colors to hairstyles to even I think Lenscart uses it. It shows in the advertisement also. So you can select whatever frame is suitable for your face, and then you can order that frame. So I think that is augmented reality. Virtual reality is actually it makes you believe that you are in a virtual world altogether. So there's nothing real. Here there's a real house, for instance, or here the real you who's actually selecting the lens and so on. In virtual reality, it's actually completely a virtual thing. An example of that is in airlines, they teach the pilot training, for instance, is completely VR. There's no real life. I mean, while training, there's a headset, and it gives that person actually believes that the trainee believes that he or she is in the airplane, flying it. So I think that's the difference between AR and VR. But that will be also part of Industry 4.0. Then there's 3D printing. 3D printing is a revolutionary thing, and you can actually print just about anything. Of course, there are limitations in terms of for mass production. There are limitations, and if the time permits, I'll come to that. But I think important thing is that even including human organs, you can virtually print anything today using 3D printing. You can feed the raw materials and you can design it and then feed that design, and by layer, it actually manufactures. I mean, it is just absolutely unthinkable. Similarly, nanotechnology is going to play havoc, but I won't go into that because it's not too much time. And the last is artificial intelligence. Now, the artificial intelligence is a very interesting phenomenon, and I'll talk about the whole journey of artificial intelligence and where it stands today. And then I'll take a few examples of how it's likely to change our lives. All these are going to change our lives, by the way. Now, artificial intelligence initially started as a rule-based system. You know, in the in fact, its origin is, I can go to Plato or Aristotle, how people thought about mechanical, tools, mechanical things which look like humans and operate like humans, etc. I mean, there are hundreds of, like from Homer, poet, to even Indians, to Greek, to Romans and all that. But the real stuff started with, Boole, and then so on and so forth. Alan Turing, in fact, was the first one to put forth the rules of what is artificial intelligence. He put forth what is known as Turing test. Alan Turing was a great guy. I mean, he, in fact, in Second World War, Germans used Enigma as a computer which generated a secret code to communicate between German military officers. And Britishers wanted to break it. If you could break it, you could know how Germans are going to move their troops and what they're going to attack next. So British wanted to break that code. It was absolutely paramount in winning this war. And Britain was almost losing it, as we know. And the task was given to Alan Turing, absolutely the world's greatest mathematician at that time. He took that challenge, broke the code, by the way. He broke Enigma. And that is why actually England won the Second World War. Winston Churchill has gone on record saying that we won this war 2 years earlier because of Alan Turing. But Alan Turing was gay, and then he was prosecuted, he was tried, and he underwent chemical castration. He died at the age of 42. But then he actually devised a test which is called a Turing test, which essentially meant, he put forward a theory that if in one room there's a computer and another room there's a human being, and a human being is communicating with the computer, and computer is answering the questions that are asked by this human being in such a fashion that the human being cannot know whether in the other room there's a computer or a human being. And if that happens, then that computer is supposed to have attained what he called as artificial intelligence. Actually, artificial intelligence, the term was coined sometime later. But that is the whole idea of, so you could not distinguish between a machine and the computer. But you see, there is a huge challenge. I mean, the human brain, mimicking that brain, and even body, the movements of the body, that's where robotics comes into picture, is an extremely difficult challenge. So earlier what people thought was, it is very difficult. So let us just sort of build systems which will encapsulate the knowledge of human beings in different areas. So the first ones, really were where a system came into existence, which was Dendral, which was essentially psychotherapeutic expert system. This is called an expert system. It used rule-based systems. For instance, in medical, supposing a patient comes and says, I have fever and I have headache, then maybe he has influenza, whatever. So there were rules that if there's fever, if also the headache, and also etc., then this, and then this medicine should be given. So all those rule-based systems were designed, and they were called as expert systems. Similar expert systems were in engineering design, pipe design, all that. Even a psychotherapist also used to use some of those. That typically a patient comes and says, "I'm feeling depressed." So the machine says, "Why are you feeling depressed?" So typically psychotherapists also would ask that question, and similarly. So that's how the initial systems were developed, and people had a lot of hope that they will work. In 1956, there was a Dartmouth conference of artificial intelligence that kicked off a huge amount of enthusiasm about AI. which, essentially in MIT in Massachusetts and in Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and a few universities in America, a great amount of research started, but essentially it was to mimic human thinking. How does an expert work? How does a legal expert work? So go to a lawyer and find out how the lawyer works, put that in some rules and build an expert system so that it works as an aid or help to the lawyer or doctor or teacher or whatever the vocation is. So basically, expert systems used to augment or help the capabilities of a profession. That's how expert systems are built. But then there were limitations, because how many conditions can you put in medical science? I mean, there are hundreds of conditions, and today if X-ray shows this and then blood test shows this, and so I mean there are many if thens and buts. So putting all those into a code became very, very difficult, and that the same was true about most of the other vocations as well. And that hit a wall. Now, about 1980s, the enthusiasm actually went away. I mean, it was called AI winter. The whole period is known as AI winter. But then the real interest started picking up after 2000 onwards. And then especially after 2010 onwards, AI really came of age. And that the reason is machine learning and deep learning. And I'll explain what that means to you. With machine learning and deep learning, the real, the normally you have a program, and then you feed data to the program, input data. The program actually takes input data and gives out output data. That is how it is run. Now here, you feed data and build an algorithm. So in normal cases, you have an algorithm which gives out data. But in machine learning and deep learning is a part of machine learning. I'll come to that. But essentially in machine learning, you feed a lot of data and machine learns and builds an algorithm. That is the beauty. And I'll give you an example. If I'm not mistaken, it's in Canada. For instance, in Canada was ruled by Britishers and French both. So especially the government documents, and there are multiples of them. As we know, in government, there's a huge amount of documents which have to be translated from English to French and French to English. And there are hundreds and thousands of them which have to be translated. How do you do that? And there were hundreds of thousands of people who are hundreds or thousands, I don't know how many, but people just doing translation every day of lots of documents and a lot of circulars. And as we know, in government there are many. So that was the job of hundreds of translators. Then a thought came in the mind, which was a revolutionary thought, in my opinion, and that has changed the entire landscape of artificial intelligence. The thought came to the mind: how does a child learn a language? You don't teach a grammar to the child. You don't say this is noun, this is adjective, this is a verb, and this is how the syntax and the rules of grammar and vocabulary and stuff like that. You don't teach the child the rules of grammar. But the child just listens hears the conversation and learns and picks up the rules of grammar and vocabulary as it goes along. Can we mimic that? Can we reproduce that in computers? That was the basis of machine learning. So what they did was they fed one English sentence, one French sentence, and the program that they wrote was essentially to find similarities between them and find out how the translation was done. So when the first sentence was fed, obviously machine made some guesses. It did not know what was the noun in French and what was the noun in English, what corresponded to what. It did not know. It may have made some guess. So the algorithm may have made some guess. Then the second line was fed. Now the machine started thinking, correlating the first hypothesis with the second English language sentence and French language sentence, tried to find out what are the similarities. Are there some same words? I went to Pune, I went to Nasik. If there are two, then went is the common word, that kind of stuff. So that's how it started learning and picking up the similarities and started building vocabularies. And there are hundreds and thousands of such sentences which were fed. And the program had to find out the similarities, understand the rules of grammar, and build the dictionaries of both languages. How interesting. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the I can't even begin to describe. But I understand that in Canada, or I think anywhere, the sentences can be translated with 97% accuracy. That has gotten rid of obviously hundreds of people. I'll come to the job situation later on as to how most of the jobs are in jeopardy in tomorrow's world. But the point is that similarly, face recognition. How does a child recognize a cat? You may not understand this, but it's a miracle that you show a picture of a cat to a child and 2 months later, if there is another cat of a different size, of different color, and sitting in a different pose, please understand, the child still says that's a cat. I mean, this is a miracle of the brain, by the way. Miracle, because those who have done CAD CAM and computers and graphics and rotation and stuff like that will realize that essentially the pixels of that cat are actually stored in the brain, and you'll need a lot of rotation and expansion and then color mapping and so on to understand that it is the same picture, same animal. So it is, I mean, it is really miraculous how brain captures that as the same animal. So what they did was they showed a picture of the cat to the machine. And picture is obviously divided in various vertical and horizontal rows and pixels, as we know, resolution, you must have heard about this. So all those pixels are sent to the camera of the robo or machine or whatever. So those pixels are caught through various layers. I won't go into that. There are artificial neural networks. So there are various layers, and if there are many such layers, it's called deep learning, by the way. If the layers are very few, then it's machine learning. But it's not called as deep learning. But deep learning is a part of machine learning, which uses artificial neural networks, which, for instance, captures the image of the cat. Then within the algorithm itself, expands that cat in size, changes the color, rotates it so that different positions, and each time it keeps on capturing those pixels and learns the way the translation was learned. The algorithm is actually written in such a fashion that it learns to train that this is a cat in whatever angle you see, in whichever shape and whichever etc. So it actually learns to recognize a cat. That's how today machine recognizes hundreds of animals, hundreds of people. That's so face recognition is a very important part of Facebook and important part of most of the companies, and important part that will actually find out who criminals are. And if a criminal is moving in a city and a police say that he has actually started from Bandra, then all the signals which will, in tomorrow's world, which will have cameras, which will capture photographs of all the vehicles which pass through, and then will match at absolutely lightning speed with the photos of criminals, and it can rotate, etc. Because the photo that you take may not be the photo that you have stored, because the person may be standing with his head moved and so on. So the machine has a huge capacity to rotate and match and so on, and then find out that this guy has actually started from Bandra, has now reached Andheri, and is likely to go to Borivali. So the phone call goes immediately to the respective police station by matching this photograph. So I think there's a huge sort of things that are likely to happen in tomorrow's world. So face recognition is a way. All the driverless cars, for instance, which artificial intelligence is given rise to, is all based on deep learning. Because driverless cars is shown hundreds of pictures of roads and markings on the roads and signals and policemen and people and all kinds of obstacles and things like that. Hundreds different. So the driverless car has to negotiate all that. It's obviously very, very trivial that there are sensors to if there's an obstacle, the driverless car knows that there's an obstacle and automatically brakes are applied, etc. I mean, that is, I wouldn't say trivial in terms of actual engineering, but trivial in terms of understanding. But in driverless car, you need to actually, through sensors, you need to obviously coordinates with Google Maps and many things. That's a very complicated issue. But I think with lanes and so on, sensors, it knows where to turn. There are Google Maps, so it knows where to turn. If there's an obstacle, it halts. If there's a signal, it actually recognizes the signal, it halts, etc. And all that has been tried, tested. Ford, in fact, is going to come out with driverless cars in 2021, for instance, just to give you an idea. There are many places today that in China, China has a huge advantage in AI, by the way. 80% of patents in AI are captured by US and China. And India is just nowhere. I mean, I think we just sort of, we're just world's coders, in my opinion. I think we lag behind, and there's a Rajiv Malhotra, I think. There's an excellent book which has come out, which actually talks about why India will not be able to win this race. Rajiv Malhotra, I think. Exceptionally good book about artificial intelligence, and there are 5 battlegrounds. Everybody should read it. It's a very good book, and come out just 3 months ago. I think the whole point is that with the driverless cars will come of age in years to come. But all this is based on machine learning and deep learning, and the impact of machine and deep learning is not just driverless cars and face recognition and so on. It's huge. In robotics, for instance, computer vision, for instance, computer speech recognition, speech generation. All these are part of artificial intelligence. But ultimately, I think the AI has given up the aim of behaving completely like human being. For instance, there is the IBM Watson has won against the best chess player, as we know. But then is IBM Watson is a software piece, as you must have known. But is IBM Watson conscious of that victory? Is IBM Watson conscious of itself? Does it have a consciousness like we have, that we exist? We exist at this particular place. We have this aim in life. Does Watson have that? So therefore, it's pointless to just sort of compete with human beings and try to mimic and try to be as like human beings. That's the aim that AI has already given up. But AI has very significantly put forth an aim to be useful, and not just useful, but be much better than all the human beings, than what human beings can do. And there are several examples that I have with me. Then there's natural language processing. I'm sure you must have done in Google, for instance. See, if any of you have done programming in COBOL, C, Java, C++, etc., they're all structured languages. You have to give instructions in a particular fashion, if, then, else, and all that kind of stuff. Open a file. The computer doesn't understand the way we talk. We talk in natural language. If I say that I'll go to Pune, but if it is raining, then I'll go to Nasik. And if I don't go to Nasik, then I might even go to Nagpur if the temperature is not very high. Now, this is a very complex statement. A computer normally would not understand this. But in natural language processing, there is an attempt that the computer will understand this. And there's a proof. I mean, to Google, if you say, give me all the hotels which are near Vashi station, give me the names of all hotels, just speak it out. Now what happens? When you speak it out, the voice signals are converted into text first. Then natural language processing means it understands that you want the names of the hotels near Vashi station. Then obviously it catches out of Google Map, finds out where you are, and then finds out in that where the hotels are, and so on. Then obviously gives you a list of all the hotels. So there's a lot of coordination of various software pieces. But please understand that the computer started understanding natural language. You don't have to program in the same if, then, else, and that kind of stuff. You are talking to the computer in a natural language. And that is the whole beauty. That's why translations. I mean, Google Translate, for instance, you put a line and it can translate in whatever hundreds of languages. It still cannot translate a novel. That's another story, because there are a lot of aesthetic elements involved in translating a novel. There are a lot of connotations to a sentence or whatever you want to say. But all, for instance, government circulars or hundreds of other sentences that you and I speak every day can be translated. That's what Google Translate does. So in fact, it's going to find enormous amount of use in what was called Google Glass. And in in fact, it was announced a few years ago, and then after, in fact, 4 or 5 years, it'll come into existence. If you put that glass on, there's a chip there, and then there's a chip translates. So if you could meet somebody in Paris, and then somebody speaking to you in French, it translates and you can hear in English. And if you give an answer, it translates into French. Therefore, the person also understands what you're talking about. So I think the Google Glass also then has maps and Google Maps and can give directions, can recognize faces. I mean, it has happened to me many times that I've met, and of course now I'm 70, so I don't recall a lot of people who meet me. And sometimes if somebody I meet, then I don't recognize that I have met him before, him or her before. And it's very awkward. But Google Glass, it has a chip and it stores hundreds of, the memories will be very high. Also, it will be connected to internet. And therefore, it can check all the people that you have met before, do all the search, as I've said. And then it'll display the name. The person can't understand, can't know this. But when you are looking at that person, immediately at the wink of an eye, it'll display the name of the person with whom you're talking to. So you can say, hello, Mr. Rahul, or whatever. So it's important. If you're looking at a Taj Mahal hotel, for instance, and then say, it'll give the history of Taj Mahal hotel, how it was built and so on. It can actually give you the important details about that hotel, which are the dining halls and which are vacant. Where can you book a seat? Can you book a room? What are the rates? And so on. So by just looking at it, and you can just ask questions and it can give you answers. So basically, Google Glass, I'm just trying to give you some sort of idea about what's likely to happen. There are several. I can go for 4 or 5 hours actually, because I'm writing a book on AI, and there are hundreds of such examples. But essentially, AI consists of expert systems, which still exists in many areas, but that's how it began. But then it's, obviously it's gone on into natural language processing, robotics. Earlier, robotics were limited to only on a conveyor belt. If there were, let's say, soaps of red color on a particular size, and there was an odd man out. I mean, there was something green and of a different color because of some mistake. Then the robot would pick that up and put it aside. I mean, that was essentially limited kind of. Today, robots can do huge amount of stuff. In fact, in automobile manufacturing, 80% of the work that is done is by robots, by the way. And that's true about hundreds of things. In agriculture, there are robots which can do harvesting, which can do crop monitoring. There are drones which can do, which can tend, which can herd the cattle, and so on and so forth. So basically, in agriculture, for instance, there's a huge amount of artificial intelligence and mechanization that will take place. It's already taking place, and almost just about anything can be done. There are robots which will shake the tree so that apples can fall down, or oranges can fall down, and then can be collected and then can be shipped and so on and so forth, almost automatically. So there are, I have many examples, but I mean, to run through all those will take a long time. But essentially, the point I'm trying to make is that this is going to shake the world. I'll run through a few examples, maybe, so that you understand. For instance, there is a not attempt, but it's almost in a few years that there are medical implants in the brain for psychological ailments, for attention deficit and depression. That's where it is being tried. That there are medical implants in the brain, which they can change your mood. The whole idea, the research that is going on, that if it detects that some, depressive moods, you're getting into a depressive mood, and then sort of creates a very happy mood in your mind. Same thing about ADD and so on and so forth. I mean, this is being, or medical implants for AR or VR experience. You can, and that is actually true. I mean, in tourism industry, it's that this is being tried out today as we speak in California. If you, it's not just sort of implant in the brain, but also with AR and VR equipment, you can actually get the same experience as bathing in Niagara, or going in a safari in Africa, or climbing Everest and so on and so forth. It can make you believe or make you feel that you're actually doing it. And that's going to affect the tourism industry, especially for the elderly and people who can't sort of walk or run. It can still give you a lot of experience that they were missing in their lives. So I think lots of, then there are expert systems for diagnosis, robotic surgery. Then there's a Deep Mind is it had a program to diagnose 750 eye diseases, and the error rate was only 5.5%, which is much lower than the human judgments. A team of Oxford had AI to and which outperformed cardiologists in anticipating heart problems. And so on. I think there's also today there's an equipment which can read the heartbeats and find out how your heart is working at 200 yards distance with specific signaling and so on. So even if somebody is standing at 200 yards away, I can find out how that person's heart is working. I mean, it's actually going to crazy levels, I guess. Then there are in transportation, I've already told you that driverless cars, then avoid accidents, because driverless cars will not have accidents. That's how they're designed, at least. And but then hundreds and lakhs of drivers will become jobless. Taxi drivers, private drivers, bus drivers, tractor drivers, and so on and so forth. So same thing is true about then digital twins in agriculture. I mean, you can take a piece of land and then simulate. We obviously use of sensors and so on. It's a complicated issue, but using sensors, you can simulate the environment of that farm and then decide what you can then by simulation. I mean, you can then choose that if I use this fertilizer, what will happen? If I use this water level, what will happen? If I use this pesticide, what will happen? If I take this crop, how much yield will I get? So given all the properties of the soil, okay, the productivity, the water retention, and past history, etc., you can simulate and then find out what you should do to produce the maximum. The robots in agriculture can do pollination, weeding, pesticide application, fruit harvesting, monitor livestock, sort harvests, analyze irrigation systems, utilize UAV technology to analyze crop health, aerial monitoring of fungi levels using computer vision and deep learning, machines with cameras and tactile sensors to identify crops that are ready to harvest, eliminate labor-intensive monitoring and harvesting, cattle herding drones, cow milking machines, automated quarter stripper robots for oranges, vacuum tube wielding robots to suck apples of trees, fitness trackers to monitor animals' health, camera detectors to detect unhealthy produce, autonomous sprayers and fertilizers and produce, and so on. Japan, 90% of spraying is done by drones. In one British farm, all the plants nurtures and harvests barley without a person setting a foot on the farm. Not a single person goes to the farm, but the planting and the nurturing and harvesting is done automatically. US giant Cargill uses facial recognition to monitor cows. Chinese use voice, etc. There are several. See, the use in military is very frightening, because tomorrow's wars, in my opinion, will be fought by drones and robots. And I have huge stuff on this, what CIA is doing and what China is doing, etc. But I think it will be time consuming. But suffice it to say that in tomorrow's, another 30, 40, 50 years hence, the wars will be between whose robots are more powerful, because they'll be without living beings. Drones, for instance, will fight, and those which are more powerful will win. And I think that's going to be very, very dangerous, because so it's a technology game. And I think India is really sleeping at this moment. I mean, we don't even realize. We just depend on coding. You give me what to do, and I'll do. We send people to America, and we feel the IT superpower, etc. I think we don't have the. And therefore, I would urge you to read Raju Malhotra's book. There are, of course, several books like Suskins, and there are even I've read at least I have 100 books on AI today, but read at least 10 very thoroughly, and the remaining I've read what I call as vertical reading, which means I know what's there inside the book, but I've not read line by line another 70, 80 books. I think, but there are several books that I would recommend. I mean, I can recommend to Dr. Kulkarni later on, but there are 4 or 5 that I would very strongly recommend. But India is lagging behind in most of these. I don't think we'll win this technology war in the next 20, 30 years, unless we wake up and really start doing something. There is an attendant issue about employment and incomes, etc., which I'll probably touch upon at this time. And then military, I have several, because they don't require food, they don't require sleep, no strikes, no moods, no medicine. So US Navy and Air Force testing unmanned vehicles. US Navy had asked for budgets which are 10 times more than last year's, and that's because of AI. Israel and China are also spending a lot. Boston Dynamics has robots who open doors, lift heavy objects, climb stairs, and whatever. In financial services, see, you must realize that in financial services, the disruption is already taking place. In China, there is no note, no currency, no coin, no credit card, no debit card, no checkbook. Do you know this? In China, nothing of this kind exists. Nandan Nilekani, a friend of mine, who has an excellent YouTube lecture on the future of financial services, and he had said a few years ago that in India it will happen in 5 to 10 years. And I had told him, I don't think it will happen in India for 5 to 10 years. However, with Paytms and Bhims and all that, I think you will really see that mobile transactions are taking root. And of course, in India, we're still fighting with poverty, unemployment, and literacy, and so on. So India's problems are very unique, and they really are sort of derived from our economic policies, etc. And I've written a full book called Anartha, which all of you read Marathi. I would urge you to read that, because I think it's an eye opener. But that's a separate issue. I won't touch upon that, because that's quite an that's about economics and so on. But the important thing is that in 5 to 10 years time, worldwide, maybe 10 years time, there will be no coins, no notes, no checkbooks, no credit debit cards, nothing. Everything will be in mobile, in zeros and ones. You work, so your money will be deposited electronically. You spend, your money will be withdrawn, credited, debited electronically. That's it. All buildings, all offices will become museums, by the way. All bank, insurance, all offices will become museums, because there's no need to go to the office to work, as has been shown in COVID times, by the way. You don't need to work. You can work from home. Today, of course, it's possible in IT and so on and so forth. But in banking, why do you want to go to the bank? You can apply for a loan from your home. You can attach your documents, photocopies of your house, whatever you want to, attach the property or whatever you want to use to get that loan. The banker can actually write to the home department or whatever to make sure that the home is owned by that person and so on, then grants that loan. Or if the limit is only higher level manager can approve that loan, then passes on to a higher manager. That manager can approve that loan, and the loan amount is deposited in your account electronically. Why do people, you don't dispense cash today because ATMs are there. So why do people who work for a bank need to go to the bank? That's point number one. Point number two is, tomorrow's world, why do they even need to exist? Because all this could be done automatically. Much of that. And there'll be far fewer people who will be required. Even for insurance claims and settlements and so on and so forth, there'll be very few people required. The jobs is going to be a very serious issue. There are estimates that the job loss could be 40 to 60% in by 2040, 2050. Estimates of several companies. Then they differ. There are several optimistic people who say that there will be jobs that will be lost, but then as many jobs will be created. And they give the historical examples. Didn't it, when people moved from agriculture to industries in industrial revolution, didn't they find jobs? Or from industries to services, didn't they find jobs? They did. But this time it is really different. What's likely to happen is that the people who will lose jobs and people who will get jobs are not the same people and not in the same geography. People who lose jobs maybe in India, somewhere in Pune, Shirdi, somewhere in UP, and people will get jobs maybe in Bangalore, some people in Bangalore, but mostly in Silicon Valley or China. So the geography is going to be different. The kind of people who get the jobs will be very high-tech and high-paid jobs, and a lot of people will be jobless. But I want to make a point here. Until a few years ago, before machine learning took off after 2010 onwards, people used to believe that artificial intelligence will replace blue-collar workers. Only repetitive, drudgery work will be replaced by artificial intelligence. That's not true any longer. The work of lawyers, the work of you guys, the doctors. I mean, I'm not saying doctors will not be required, but the nature of work will change because there's an enormous amount of help in diagnosis and robotic surgeries, and several areas will start sort of invading or helping, in fact. But then your nature of work will change. Even legal, you need to go through huge amount of document and find out. So how to interpret or going through the document. With natural language processing today, you can the software can surf through the document or English language and try to understand. Please understand, this is the beauty with natural language processing. How does when you send WhatsApp messages or Facebook messages, how does Facebook know what kind of person you are or whether you're likely to be a criminal? It actually knows from your Facebook posts. If you keep on talking about something like bomb, no bomber will actually use the term bomb. There are obviously code words for it. But then the police also know what kind of code words you use. So they're looking for some kind of communication between people, and there are hundreds and millions of such people. And therefore, software and AI comes into picture. It can sort of surf through millions of such documents and finds out who two people are communicating with what specific words, and try to understand the meaning and try to figure out. So there's a 60% chance that these two are trying to hatch a plot, and maybe have a bomb somewhere. So I think that is the whole beauty, because you can now the AI can understand the natural language, English, can understand and interpret it. That's how, for instance, Facebook, I mean, Google owns YouTube, for instance. So if on Google you try to search for a new car, so on YouTube you say what is a new car by Maruti or XYZ, whatever. Since YouTube is owned by Google, Google knows, and next time you watch anything, it starts putting out the advertisements which are of cars or things like that. So it's personalized advertisements which Amazon uses. By the way, Amazon uses 1 lakh robots in huge warehouses that it has, and therefore Walmart and Amazon, there's a huge amount of tussle that is going on. Walmart was a brick and mortar company, and Amazon is internet company. I won't go into the details, but let me just, because I have, it'll take 3 hours. I'll just sort of finish in 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can take questions. You see, Bill Gates has written an excellent book, Business at the Speed of Light, which he wrote in 1996. So I think and I personally feel it's a fantastic book because it predicted what's likely to happen. And at the time when he wrote, it was actually, it looked quite futuristic. For anybody who read it, was always, I wouldn't have blamed anybody who was probably was not credulous. I mean, it was looked at it with disbelief. What he had said was, all the intermediaries will vanish. All the intermediaries will vanish. So you can buy a shirt directly from the producer, or in the worst case, maybe one intermediary, which is Amazon. But you won't have hundreds of stores, displaying shirts, for instance. They all will go, and you are likely to see that. Why do you need, for instance, after the internet came to existence, all the travel agents actually vanished. Why do you need all those travel agents? You can buy tickets. Only those who sort of came up with different solutions, that we're not just cutting tickets. We will organize tours for you. We'll give you a guide. We'll book hotels for you. So basically, they said we will not just sort of buy tickets for you, but we will do extra service, give extra service. Only those survive. All the remaining vanished. Hundreds of bookstores worldwide are closing down because you can buy books directly from Amazon. Why do you need stores which keep books? I mean, Barnes and Noble also had to change its policy in Pune, Mumbai. So several stands has closed. There are several bookshops that are closing. Next 5 to 10 years, that will just vanish. Please take it from me. So intermediaries will go. There'll be direct, why do you need all these people displaying in the fridge and all that? You can buy from Amazon or mobiles and stuff like that. So another 5-10 years. So that was a fantastic. And therefore, many skills will go away. I'll just sort of take 5 minutes and then end, because it'll go on for on. ATMs came and the teller clerks' jobs went. Animation software came and hundreds of artists used to draw pictures for animation in Walt Disney's time. Their jobs were gone. With CAD/CAM, the jobs of draftsmen went. With word processor and DTP, the jobs of typists went away. Unless they unlearned and learned new techniques. So it's not that the jobs went away, but only those, first of all, jobs reduced, and only those who could learn new techniques or technologies, only those jobs remain. Please understand. Then e-insurance and banking, all the managers, agents, and accountants, they all that can be done. With driverless cars, all the drivers. With software, lots of programmers' jobs will go away, because testing and so on, there are many things in software designers as well which can be automated. Of course, it's not that simple. I know the intricacies involved, but I think it'll happen. Expedia, Kayak, and Travelocity travel agents were jobless. TurboTax eliminated lakhs of tax accountants. Language translation will eliminate thousands of translators. Automated telephone systems or call center guys will, because a lot of work can be automated. Telephone operators and call center guys will be jobless. Not all. By the way, in all of these, a few will remain in strategic positions. But this is going to be. Then in internet, all the middlemen, bookshops, retail shops, etc., will go away, etc. The companies also, if they don't adapt to these changes, will go away. And I'll just give you a list of companies which actually went out of business because they did not refuse to change. HMV, Woolworths, Blockbuster, Jessup, Virgin, Atlantic, Megastore, Habitat, Focus, Silicon Graphics, Reader's Digest, Boulder, which is a big shop, bookshop, by the way. I used to go in America. Then Game, Lehman Brothers, RBS, Lloyd's, British Leyland, Polaroid. Then they didn't close down, but they certainly suffered enormously, or they were taken over. Encyclopedia Britannica with CD-ROMs and all that. Kodak once was an extremely big company, and they had a choice of analog versus digital. In 1980s, the chairman retired and a new chairman was to be appointed, CEO, I think. And there was a tussle between two. One chose analog because Kodak had a monopoly of analog. Kodak's analog film was made of, I think, 23 layers or something. It was very difficult for anybody to copy or mimic, and therefore Kodak had a monopoly. And therefore they chose a CEO who actually stuck to analog films. But then the digital technology took over, and Fujifilm and Canon actually overtook. And where is Kodak today? Polaroid. Where is Nokia today, for instance? Blockbuster, Boulder, as we saw, Toys R Us, Pan Am, Compaq. Compaq could not compete with Dell and therefore acquired by HP. There are several reasons. There are several companies that I have who could not compete because they could not keep up with the technology. The industry 4.0 with growth of cloud computing, AR and VR with big data and artificial intelligence, which in turn consists of expert systems and robotics and natural language processing and the machine and deep learning, which is now going to be at the forefront today, machine and deep learning, which is driving the entire landscape of artificial intelligence, is going to be the important thing. And therefore, the big data and machine and deep learning and all that is today to put together is called a data science. You must have heard this term. And your sons and daughters and nephews must be asking you whether I should take a course in data science. I would certainly recommend they should, because that's the future. I would just talk about a few things and end here. There are few very disturbing things that are likely to happen, because a lot of unemployment will ensue, will take place, and the income inequality will increase. Because with these technologies, only those, and that has happened in the IT as well, I mean, or even the last 30 years, and I've dealt with that in my book, Unearthed, which is essentially a book on Indian economy. The inequality is increased enormously. Today in India, 1% of Indian wealthy people own more than, I think, three times more than the lower 70% of population. This is horrendous. And this will increase because, so as I've said, there will be job creation. I'm not trying to portray a very bleak picture that all jobs will go away. No, some jobs will be created, some jobs will be destroyed. But this time it's going to be different. Earlier times, the jobs destroyed were not exactly the same as job created. They were jobs created were less, but then they didn't sort of, you couldn't call that as a catastrophe. Now I can clearly foresee a catastrophe. And there are multiple ways to deal with it. The whole debate today, if you go to Google and talk about UBI, Universal Basic Income, the entire debate about UBI is essentially what to do with this unemployment if that happens. That's likely to happen. But there is a counter view that, today, how will you look after elderly? How do you look after sick people? Today, you're not looking after them very properly. So you'll need huge number of nurses and maybe for their entertainment for this. But again, robots will take their place. A lot of that. Though there are counter argument that human touch can't be done away with and so on. So I think the debate is on. But essentially, unemployment will certainly happen. And what will you do? There are two things. What will you do with, how will you survive? And what will you do with your time? How will you survive can be tackled with what is called a universal basic income. And there are experiments about UBI in Finland and a few other countries that are already taking place. And there are some examples which are pretty successful as well. Which essentially means, why is it called universal? Whether it is Tatas or whether you're a Dehadi Kamgar, you still get a particular monthly money regardless of your wealth, regardless of your status, in your bank account directly every month, because the productivity would have increased enormously and therefore government can afford it. So that's the whole idea. So in case there are unemployed people, money will be deposited in your bank every month. So you don't need to worry about how you're going to live. But what will you do with your time? And that depends upon your culture, whether you actually spend it in speculation or drinking and or whatever, or you spend it in music and reading and swimming and enjoying and spreading knowledge, acquiring knowledge, and pursue your research, which you couldn't because of your job, but you wanted to always think about philosophy, or maybe think about Big Bang and how the world was created. Maybe you want to do research in biology, which you couldn't because you're an accountant. All that can be now fulfilled because you have extra time. So I think it all depends upon the culture. So that's what the debate is centering around. There's a huge inequality that I see as very dangerous. There's a tremendous amount of unemployment that I can see happening, and there are obviously some jobs will be created. I'm not denying that at all. But unfortunately, they'll be somewhere else, and in some of the sections, and the same jobs, the same people will not get the same jobs. That is the newly created jobs. That is going to be a very fundamental difference, because most of the things that we do today will be done differently, or we will not have to do it at all. I mean, that is the point, and I'm pretty convinced about it because of my latest reading, and which has been published very lately. Though, I mean, it's anybody's guess. I mean, I can't really I can't predict that 40% of jobs will go, 60 or whatever, but it's going to be substantial. 20, 30%, I think certainly will go. But the nature of work, almost 100% will change, and it's going to be very, very difficult for people to really, take that. A sociologist has said that each person will have to change jobs 6 times a lifetime. See, it doesn't mean that you change a job from Bank of America to Citibank. That's not changing a job. The way you do things, because with tailor clerks were dispensing cash with ATMs, they were jobless. They had to do something else. That's how 6 times in your lifetime you have to unlearn and learn new things 6 times in your career. And that's going to take a toll on your psychology. And I think it's going to be, interesting times are ahead. I won't be around, but I think all of you guys, or your sons and daughters and nephews, certainly will. I would, I wouldn't like to frighten them. Certainly want to tell them that things are changing far faster than you think they will, and they have in the past. So I think it's very important to not let down our guards and be very, very prepared all the time. Even businesses, any of you, if there are entrepreneurs, 5 years hence, you must think about, is my business going to continue 5 years hence? Or is going to be, like I've said, travel agents or many other people. I mean, their jobs will be completely different after 10 years. So think ahead and plan ahead and be prepared to unlearn and learn. If not necessarily programming, but at least be able to work, live with the new technology and use it. And unless you do that, you will be thrown out of, you will be in a periphery, and you will have to somehow manage to survive. And I think this is my message. Thank you very much for listening to me, patiently. And thank you, Dr. Sriram Kulkarni, and thank you, Navi Mumbai Doctors Foundation. And I could have just gone on and on, but I think I want to sort of try your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Achyut. You can have a glass of water because there are a lot of questions waiting for you. There are a lot of questions.
I don't know.
Some of the questions are a bit hypothetical, but there are few which are related to health, and they are really very pertinent. There is one very interesting question. One person has asked, is it possible to regenerate the voice of a person who does not exist?
Yes. Absolutely. Well, but unless you had a recording of that person. Today, I mean, you can't sort of imagine what the voice of Plato was, for instance. I mean, it is very hard to imagine what the voice of Chanakya was. I mean, but but even if there's a small segment that is available, even if there's some segment that is available, you can digitize it and then you can change it. You see, for instance, in tomorrow's world, it will be extremely easy for to produce a movie sitting on your desktop using animation, 3D animations and all that, and variety of software that is possible. Today it's being used very, for bad purposes, but by using this, I can create a movie, write a story, create a movie sitting at my PC with me as a hero and Marilyn Monroe as a heroine, which is obviously a great thought, But the point I'm trying to get at is, person who's dead, I can create a movie, and that is something which is extremely, it can be dangerous, but this is quite possible. You see, because with animation and 3D animation and whatever, what can be done. It's a very dangerous thought, but in tomorrow's world, you can do anything.
Amol Annadate also has joined. Amol,
hi,
unmute
Amol.
yourself.
Hello, sir. Sorry, sir. I joined a little late.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it is a great honor to be with two of my mentors, SVK sir and Achyut Godbole sir.
No. I always enjoyed your interventions on the television, by the way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Achyut, one of our doctors asked to talk more about Sharir.
Well, I have written a book called Sharir, with actually I have the co-author is Amruta Deshpande, and she's very passionate about biology and Sharir. It's a 575 pages book, by the way, and it talks about human physiology and anatomy. I must admit that I sort of learned it only as a curiosity. I had around 50 books about this, how the body works and things like that. I'm not a doctor, and nor do I have any in-depth knowledge, frankly. But by reading books and understanding how it works, how it can be made very, very sort of interesting. If you sort of read any of my books, Kimagar, Arthat, Manat, Ganiti, Sapusa, all these books, or even Boardroom, they start with the history of the subject and then actually explain that subject. For instance, if you look at Kimagar, it actually talks about cosmology. It explains your relativity. There are hundreds of people who have come to me and said, after reading Kimagar, I have understood Einstein's theory. That was a great thing. So in Sharir also, I have, I mean, we have tried to explain how various organs and various systems, like respiratory systems and circulatory systems and all that, how they work with figures and so on in Marathi. The reason for, I was very sort of doubtful about whether I should be writing this book at all. It's just the passion of, reading, understanding, and then explaining something in Marathi. And my co-author also shares the same passion. I think the important thing is I'm a student all along my life. And I guess I'm a reasonably good teacher. I mean, when I used to teach operating systems or data communications to people, in information technology, people used to come and tell me that they've never heard anything of this kind before in their lives. So I think I'm a little, if I can be a little sort of patting my own back, I'm a reasonably good teacher. So I unless I understand it, I don't want to write. So I try to understand that and then try to write all that. It will be published by March. So that's Sharir. But the more, equally important is there's another book called Biology, which also both of us are writing, which is around 450 pages book. Then there's a book I'm writing with Asavari Nifadkar, which is a book on Pravas, which is a history of travel. How from the Aboriginals to the history of the wheel, and then ships, and then railways, and balloons, and aircrafts, and space war, between NASA and all that, and then future of travel. So I think it's a very interesting kind of thing. With Vaidehi Limaya, the Sukshma Jantu is an extremely interesting look into the micro world. And with COVID, obviously, we know the bacteria and viruses both. Vaidehi is a great co-author. I mean, she's a very, very thorough, in a subject. It's been great pleasure. My Lord is a history of law, as I've said, and that will come out very soon with Madhuri Kazwe, who is a lawyer herself, by the way. And she has done a fantastic job, In fact, I must say that out of these 10 books which are going to come, 3-4 books are my own, single-handed. All the rest are with co-authors. And I give all the credit of those books to my co-authors. I mean, they worked enormously. I'm also writing a book with Shobha, my wife, about autism. Because as you probably might have known from my autobiography, Musafir, that I have an autistic son. And we both have, battling to deal with that issue. I'm sure you know what autism is all about. So we want to sort of pass on that knowledge about its history, its symptoms, and its treatments, and what to do about it, etc. So these are short books, obviously. Then there is an AI and Industry 4.0 and a book called Parva, by the way. Parva means, is day after, because there is a novel by Nanda Khare called Udya, which is tomorrow. And therefore, I could not choose that title because I didn't want to confuse the reader. So I've chosen the title called Parva. And that I'm writing with Asavari again. And that will give a sort of view about what's likely to happen in tomorrow's world, the way I have talked about today. But it will deal with a lot more about technology, computing, and communications. I've talked about 5G. It'll talk about future of travel, future of several industries and agriculture and so on and so forth. So I think these are the books that I'm engaged in right now. And in COVID times, I've been able to utilize my time in sort of writing those.
There is one question from the same person. Is it
Yeah.
possible to identify what exactly happens to human after death? Means the body, soul, and thought process.
No, I mean, this is an. I'll just put forward what I believe. I believe in materialism. I don't believe in idealism or soul or whatever. I believe that your body is disintegrated into atoms and molecules and actually goes back to, and then uh, even in my body, for instance, there could be an atom which actually maybe is from Genghis Khan's body. Who knows? It's absolutely possible because the body disintegrates and then goes to whatever and then reunites into various forms in various animate or inanimate things. And so therefore, I mean, I have no I don't believe in uh, afterlife either, or punarjanma, etc., and soul, and so on and so forth. I don't. But that's my personal view. And how I wish I could actually live forever, and take take rebirth and etc. But I mean, that's my intellect doesn't allow me to sort of believe in this.
Purva has asked one very interesting question.
Hmm.
Are there any spectacles like what you said, Google Glass?
Hmm.
You can see beautiful dreams, and especially for people who are having nightmares. This is something very practical.
Yeah, but that see, the point is, if you look at what is likely to happen in this coming century, I can clearly see many things happening. As I've said, there are uh, chips in the brain and so on. As you must have heard of bionics, I'm sure that that and that experiment was successful in 2008 in England, by 2006 or 8 in bionics. There's a chip in the brain, and if a person who's paralyzed, if I want to lift my hand but I can't because of paralysis, the chip actually sends a signal through the rods or whatever are put, and then allows me to. So chip recognizes that I'm thinking, I'm wishing to lift my hand. So the translation between my wish, that is the brain chemistry, that happens between neurons, is picked up by the chip, and the chip actually sends the signal, and then it actually allows me to lift my hand. So that experiment has been successful in UK in 2008, but I think for it to become commercial and then for it becomes, all this will happen during this century. I mean, when and how, etc., I don't know. But similarly, there'll be chips for dreams, if you like, chips of for all kinds of things. I mean, this is going to be a very interesting thing. But this is not only science fiction. This is quite likely to happen. Uh, but it'll take time, and people will experiment with variety of things, I guess.
We have got Dr. Ajit Thatte from Chiplun. He is a very techno-savvy person.
Hmm.
And चांगला कवी आहे, छान कविता लिहितो, गाणी लिहितो,
Well,
फोटो काढतो.
but
He has asked very simple, is it true that the BOTs have developed their own code language that humans could not decipher?
bots, you mean?
The bots, yes.
See it's also a theoretical question. See, Asimov had written 3 laws of robotics, that robots will not harm themselves or human beings. Now, it is not impossible that bots, which is a part of AI again, bots are essentially software and possibly hardware, which are for specific purpose and can obey your instructions or give information and so on. But you could develop code for, like machine learning. The bots can recognize your voice, do a lot of manipulation, and write programs, and write also programs which hopefully are not harmful to people, but it's not impossible to think, and that therefore you need to be careful, I guess.
We have got one uh, doctor from Army, Ninad. He is asking that AI technology can it develop cancer lesions earlier with the conventional radiology?
Yeah,
Is
but that
it
is being done right now. In fact, in radiology, a lot of AI is used today, because the interpretation of X-rays or various scans. Today, humans do it with whatever, but with artificial intelligence, what you do, how does, for instance, skin cancer or tongue cancer or throat cancer, is AI is far better than humans in recognizing. The reason is again machine learning and deep learning. It is shown the skin cancer, the patches are shown hundreds and thousands of those to the. So it learns the way it actually recognizes cats. It learns. It doesn't. It has no consciousness that this is cancer or whatever. It has been taught that this is what. So please, if hundreds and thousands of such pictures are shown, and the next time similar picture is shown, it's essentially pattern recognition. Please understand, all machine learning AI is pattern recognition. So it recognizes that, yeah, this is the same thing. And that's how it just points it out. You and I call that as cancer or whatever name we want to call it by. So I think it's very important for us to understand that in radiology especially, or in interpretations of any scans or even ECGs, and that would be very, very definitely AI would be useful.
There's a lot of people are getting more excited and asking questions.
Well, my throat may not allow. I think it's
yes. But do you believe that there is life on other planet? And the second question, I put it into same way, that is there any book which will tell you about simplified future businesses or jobs?
No, let me answer the first one. Whether there's life on other planet, it is quite possible. See, the whole question of how the first living being came into existence on Earth. And, there was a scientist called JBS Haldane. In 1932, he put forward a theory as to 3.75 billion years ago, when the first living being came into existence, what must have been the environment at that time on Earth, what chemicals and what temperature and what gases and so on and so forth. He actually put forward, he was a great scientist, by the way. He lived in India and Calcutta for a while, etc. He was a great biologist. He put forward his theory by what we call as intrapolation. Extrapolation is sort of extending it further. By intrapolation, he came out with that theory. In 1951, there was a Miller experiment in Chicago, which actually created in a laboratory the same environment and the same gases and the same chemicals, and tried to imitate and try to find out whether now a living being can be created out of that situation. It was very interesting. All the newspapers are full of headlines as to what is happening on a daily basis, etc. Whether a living being almost will start coming out and so on. But I think the important thing is, for a life to exist, there are certain preconditions. One of the first preconditions was water, by the way, and temperature. I mean, temperature is not so suitable for life. Of course, this is very controversial, because in an extremely cold situation, extremely cold parts of Earth, by the way, today you have found virus, which still survived. So again, that's virus is not life really, because it has to have a host. Bacteria you can call as a real element of life, but that's a theoretical distinction. The point I'm trying to make is that water is a first precondition. Now on Mars, water was found. So people, in fact, there was a joke. There was somebody who said, now that water is found, you can now go only with in Marathi. The joke is to say, आता आपण फक्त विस्कीची बाटली आणि दाणे घेऊन गेले तरी चालेल, पाणी आहे तिकडे म्हणून. So basically, it was very interesting that water was the first one, and then because of that, there's a possibility. In fact, Jayan Narlikar has a theory that life itself, arose because of some, some elements or some action from different planets and so on. I mean, I'm not saying it's his theory, but he has written about it. So it's a conjecture, and I guess it's possible that life exists somewhere else. I think we should stop now, because
yes. There is one futuristic question. Dr. Surendranath is asking whether your books will be translated in English and other languages, so that other language people can also utilize it.
Actually, it's a pity that I should have myself written in English. But I think the point is, there are many in English, and therefore I'm deliberately wrote in Marathi, and I don't repent it at all, because I get a huge amount of praise is not a word, but I think compliments, and for having touched really millions of lives, and I think that gives me huge satisfaction. My books, 6 of my books are translated in Hindi, by the way, but I have not published them yet, because I haven't found I don't know who's a good publisher in Hindi, and I haven't gone to Lucknow, Delhi, or something. I don't know that world altogether. But the 6 books have been published, and all the published volumes are lying on my shelf. some books are being translated into English, and let me see, what I can do, but I'll not yet.
Thank you. It was really a fantastic, and what a coincidence. For the 125th CME, this is the 125th minute that we are closing the CME.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we expect that more and more.
So we spent 2 hours, huh?
Yes, almost.
Oh
It is there was one request. I don't know whether you can drink some water and think over of it, and then help try to. One of our doctor has read, has heard you in one of the Sahitya Sammelan or
Okay.
in one of the musical mehfil.
Yeah.
That you are very good in singing the pieces of songs of the same raga in a continuity. That Malkavans and Vairavi and other things. And you
I used to do that with around 70, 80 ragas in my IIT days, how to recognize a raga and stuff. I think my throat just won't allow this, but maybe some of the time.
Yeah. So we really are absolutely indebted by your more in touch with all your books, and you are part of our home. Half of a cupboard is already occupied by Achyut Budhwane's books, and people call as there's my library of your books, my home. Anybody can come pick up the book and then go away. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
On behalf of NMDF, the president, madam, all the office bearers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are you online?
Thank
okay, so we are going to stop the program here, and we are going to stop the live YouTube
thank you
recording. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
अरुण अमोलला फोन करून सांग ना.
हो, काय सांगायचं सर?
त्याला हे बंद कर म्हणावं आता.
हो,
आणि रेकॉर्डिंग साठीची लिंक जी येईल ती लिंक आपल्याला पाठवून द्या, एडिट करून थोडीशी पाठवून द्यायची असेल तर.
नाही ते झालं बरं. हां, हे पिंपल्स फक्त उठतात.
ओके ओके. हां, बाकी दुसरे कोण जे चालू आहे त्यांच्या सगळ्यांचे व्हॉइस बंद करून टाका. यस यस प्लीज.
कृपया कुछ समय पश्चात प्रयास करें. The number you dialed is currently busy. Please try later.